by the time I was 35 years old, by doing it my way, and when I say by doing it my way, by living a selfish and self-centered lifestyle and not really caring about what anybody thought about me, by being caught up in my own trauma bonded with myself, right? Like by being caught up in my own traumas and letting them consume me, I end up a homeless man living out of my car. And I still kind of thought I had it going on. I didn't think I was as bad as the other homeless people. You know, we talk about being an egomaniac with an inferiority complex. Like, talk about being egocentric to the point where you're homeless, but you look down on other homeless people because you're not as bad as some of them.
Sometimes I make mistakes in my life. Life goes on and on and on and on and on.
Yeah. Hey, I got wisdom from my papa. He ain't have a lot of money, but he taught me how to keep the perfect posture. So folding under pressure, that ain't something that I'm about to. Crabs in the barrel, I'm just trying to be a lobster. I hit my cousin, told him to call. It's been 12 years and I ain't heard from him at all. Had a little fallout over some money. Damn, ain't it funny how the smartest people be beefing like they some dummies? But I hope you doing swell now. Hope your family well now.
Welcome to Primary Purpose with Pej. I'm your host. My name is Pej, and today is going to be a solo episode. I've titled this episode as What is Your Purpose? What is My Purpose? I felt compelled to come and speak today without a guest. I am my own guest. One of the reasons that I wanted to do this is there's a lot going on in the world right now, obviously. I think, we are in some crazy times right now. Sign of the Times shows us that the world is functioning in a very odd, peculiar way, at least politically and in many other fashions, economically, things like that. And I see that there's a lot of human suffering. I thought that I would come and talk today about many subjects, that I deal with, but also what I'm doing on the back end, outside of being a podcaster and having this show. And I kind of get into a little bit more about why I even created this show. We launched in 2025. I've been on a few other podcasts before, and I'll talk about those a little bit too. But I wanted to just talk about myself and who I am and what I do and what I believe in and what my belief system is and why I am where I am and what my purpose is. And that's why I often ask people, what is your purpose? Because I think that a life without purpose is meaningless, right? And so we need to have some meaningful reasons for why we are even existing on this God-given earth. Now, I myself am 18 plus years sober. Sober from drugs, alcohol, lots of trauma. I'm a trauma survivor in many different ways. But I being a person that I'm Iranian born, Persian. I was born in Germany to both Persian parents and raised in the States since I was 5 years old. Speak different languages, couple different languages, Farsi, English. I always felt uncomfortable in my skin, always comparing my insides to other people's outsides. And so growing up in America, especially where we moved with Salt Lake City, Utah, we lived in an area where LDS, Mormonism was pretty much predominant as far as religions went. And I grew up my parents were Muslim, Iranians, and so we grew up in a Muslim household in that part of America. I felt very uncomfortable in my skin. So I was always trying to fit in with people. And unfortunately, I really couldn't fit in with people that were not the same nationality as me, let alone had the same skin color as me. And sometimes the reason was because there was a select few people that would pick on me for my skin color. They would pick on me for my nationality. During that time when we first moved to America, there was certain diplomatic strains and relations between the U.S. and Iran. And so I somewhat suffered the repercussions due to the fact that some people didn't like my kind. Growing up, I gravitated towards experimenting with substances at a very young age. I mean, the first time I sipped alcohol was around 8 or 9 years old. Dad would drink with his buddies on the weekend. I wouldn't deem him an alcoholic. I cannot pronounce him an alcoholic. I'm certain he's not, right? But on the weekends, they would drink alcoholically, and sometimes he'd give me little sips of the cognac and little sips of the beer. And I think that he and his friends found it amusing that I would drink some and kind of get a little head change. But really, like around the age of 12 is when I got a little more deeper into using things. And I was drinking alcohol by 12. And also smoking THC as well as huffing, and that would be in the form of gasoline. So when I was doing those things, I felt like I at the time I wanted to feel comfortable in my skin, if you will, and by doing so, I got myself into a numbed state, if you will, right? Like as long as I could get and it wasn't an everyday thing. I was just, whenever I could obtain it, I would mess with it. I knew it was a taboo, not just in, in an environmental sense, but also in our community, the Persian community. Like if a person is not supposed to be doing drugs, they're supposed to go off and become educated and become somebody that's accomplished in life. And I was totally going against the grain. I come from a family where my father was, he had PhDs and definitely was very, very educated, as well as my mother. She was nothing short of being educated too. We even ended up in Utah because there was education that was being offered there. And I will say this: I liked that I grew up in Utah because I was exposed to good schooling, good schools, good teachers that taught me to read, to write, to learn, and that was the plan, most definitely. Now, when we moved to California when I was 15 years of age, it was different, right? I was now trying to adapt. I moved to an area where there was various cultures. It was definitely a melting pot of different types of cultures, and I was seeking more power within substance, and that was a way of life for me. So by doing so, I gravitated towards people that seemed like they were having fun. I mean, I was in this golden era between 15 and 16 where everything that we saw in the movies was happening in real life at people's house parties and things like that. And so I did everything that I could to obtain alcohol, to obtain substances, and that's exactly what I did. I mean, by the time I was 16 years old, I was experimenting with cocaine, and then that turned into freebasing at such a young age. And by the time I was 17, I had a very gruesome car accident where I was driving behind the wheel. I had a car full of friends, and somebody lost their life as a result of this car accident, which then caused me to become incarcerated. Now, I'm not saying that the accident itself is what got me locked up, but more behavioral stuff. Myself, acting out as a 17-year-old that couldn't process his emotions and the anguish, the guilt, the shame, the sorrow, the sadness that I was carrying as a result of this person losing their life, made me do other things that started to get me into a lot of trouble, which thus started my journey into the system. And when I went into the system, it was juvenile hall. I experienced the psych portion of that area. I told them that I was a danger to myself, that I didn't want to live. So they put me on suicide watch for a short period of time. But it was during those times where I completely was checked out from humanity as a whole. I had stopped believing in anything greater than myself. I was never really an avid religious follower of the religion that was within my home, which would be Islam and being a Muslim. I was very confused as to what I wanted. I was exposed to Mormonism in Utah and Christianity and Catholicism here in California. And so I was definitely researching that stuff before, but later on when this event happened to me and I was locked up, all bets were off. I went into atheism. It's what I want. I wanted to be a non-God believer, an absolute atheist, right? But that was short-lived. I was introduced to the 12-step world from a priest, actually, that brought us the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and he would read out of it to us. And I believe that's where I even learned the term agnostic was from the chapter We Agnostics. And so I kind of just wore that as a badge of honor. Like, I'm an agnostic. It's better to be unsure than to be certain that there's no such thing as God. And one of the reasons I did that was because I thought, well, if there is a God and I keep acting like I don't believe, maybe on doomsday I will be doomed, right? Because I have completely shut God out of my life. So, and I think deep down inside, I always felt like there was some kind of larger force, if you will, a creative intelligence, if you will, that was in the universe that definitely was running all of this. I'd be too arrogant and pompous and egocentric for me to think that I am the ruler of the universe, although I definitely acted like that. And juvenile hall it was a period of time that I was in there. Parents were going through a divorce. I was not happy about that. It really, really ruined me. Like, to think that we came to America, a family of four, a mom, a dad, a brother, a sister, and now, before I went into juvie, they had got separated, and now the divorce was going into effect while I'm locked up. They would come visit me, and it didn't go well, right? Like, when I got out, I was between homes. And then afterwards, after having a very tumultuous relationship with my father, he and I got physical with each other, and shortly after, he decided to move out of the country, back to Iran. Mom moved up to Santa Monica almost simultaneously, and here I was, just this 18-year-old kid that was just lost on his path, basically engulfed in drugs, alcohol, not just using it, but selling it so that I would have plenty of it. And I tried to go to college. I was a college dropout. I tried to go to the workplace and work 2 different jobs to try to make ends meet to pay for the apartment that my dad left me in. Couldn't do that either. I could not work in the workplace because I wasn't sober. And so what did I do? During that time, we listened to a certain type of music that would profess and talk about how to make easy money, and that would be by selling substances to people. It was a lifestyle. As I entered into young adulthood from my teenage years, 18, 19, that was the 90s. And during the 90s, there was a lot of partying going on. There wasn't a fentanyl craze. There wasn't a lot of people around us that were addicted to heroin. There was a lot of stimulants. Most definitely, there was cocaine. There was, we called it back then, speed or meth. It started with crank, and then there was an evolution of different types of meth. And I was into that at first, but I stopped for a number of years. However, I didn't stay completely sober at all by any means. I was using all these other drugs. I just felt like that stuff was evil, so I had stopped for a couple of years. And I was in the rave scene. The rave scene was really fun. Raves was like EDM. It was basically electric dance music, lots of clubbing. Alcohol was always essential. We had alcohol all around us at all times. We were at an age where we could buy alcohol easily, but definitely distribution of substances was a way of life for me, and I made it work for a long time. I didn't know I was in survival mode, but I was definitely trying to survive. I was living between Los Angeles, Orange County. Sometimes I would live in both areas, and just drug distribution was a way of life. And if you'd have been in my friend circle from the outside, you would have thought, like, Pesh has got it going on. He's got the pretty girls that come to his house. He's got all of the homies that answer to him. And really, like, my persona, like who I thought I was based off of an identity that I had incorporated into my lifestyle from the types of music that I listened to, the types of company that I kept, the people that I ran in circles with. And really, the fact was that I was a chameleon because I grew up in a very educated household, in a very good, loving, nurturing household. As tumultuous as my relationship was with my dad, he still loved me a lot. He was the type of man that definitely was verbally and physically and mentally abusive, but he also was very remorseful. And this would later become this is the way I became too in many of the relationships that I would try to get into, both romantically or even with other people. I was an angry person. I had a lot of anger that was pent up and built up within me. But also on top of that, the way that my mom would nurture and love me, she also was ultra codependent. And during the time that I was in active addiction and living that lifestyle, I did my best to steer clear of her. I mean, I would visit her every so often, but I didn't want her to know what type of lifestyle I live. And she wasn't stupid, but she also chose to stay in denial and not look at what's really going on. She didn't want to believe that her son was earning money in the wrong way. And obviously I was a liar, a cheat, and a thief. I mean, there's no way I was going to be honest with her, so I wasn't totally open with her about my lifestyle. I started a business when I was in my 20s. It was a clothing business, a clothing line, which later turned into other stuff, snowboards, skateboards, all different types of boards, and we were in the rave scene, selling our clothing to men, to women. We had a men's line, a women's line, and it actually went national for a while. And it probably would have went somewhere had I had some business sense, but I was never really educated on that. So as far as my addiction ended up having me tank the business, ruin the business. A lot of people pulled away from me. They wanted nothing to do with me. And by the time I was 30 years old, I couldn't even sell drugs anymore. I had become my own customer. I attempted to sell drugs for a little while. I had gotten caught up with some very dangerous people. And by selling their substances for a little while, I ended up becoming incarcerated again. And that didn't change me by any means. I was introduced to the sober living life after I got out of there. I met a man. His name was Sia, and he was a Persian man. I went to his sober living for 20 minutes, if tops, right? I wanted nothing to do with him because all he kept talking about was recovery. And I just wasn't ready. I still had a lot of mileage on me. And by not staying at his house, I went to another sober living. And that's where I was reintroduced to the 12-step community, the 12-step world. And I would sit there with contempt prior to investigation with my arms crossed. I never contributed. I never had anything to bring to the group. I didn't want to share. I used my other name, Brian. I am actually Pejman Brian Alaghamandan. That's my full name. But I do go by Pej. Obviously, many of you know me as Pej. But Brian was a name that I used for a long time in the school system, and even more so in the beginning of my recovery. And still to this day, a lot of old school friends still call me Brian. Bet you didn't know that. Now, by not staying sober between 30 and 35 years of age, I try to go to the Art Institute. I am an artist by nature. I love to paint. I love to draw. I was in a rap group for a while. We actually made a lot of music, as well as I was a DJ for a while. I would mix anything and everything. I played in nightclubs, strip clubs, raves, even at our own raves. I would play house music on various nights, hip hop music on various nights. It was a scene, so I just loved all different types of music. And in case you don't know, I am the biggest Prince fan that you will ever meet in your life. One of the biggest. I am part of a Prince movement. I've met Prince. We've got here in the studio a Prince guitar that sits on display. I have this deep appreciation for Prince as a musician. I believe that Prince was the best musician that ever graced this earth. Multi-instrumentalist, but I really also love so many other things about him outside of the music that he wrote, produced, played, sang on almost all of his tracks. There was a certain fashion many different types of fashion that he would display both in his arena shows or his clothing or the other people that were in his groups. And so it became a dream come true because at the age of 12, when I was growing up, I just fell in love with Prince and his music and wanted to go on in life and just follow everything that he did. So I went to countless concerts, hundreds of concerts, got to meet him, got to talk to him on national television and ask him a question due to the producer of the Arsenio Hall show putting me in a position to do that, and then many other places. I mean, I've even been to his house and he performed for us at his house. So this was for me a dream come true. And the reason I wanted to bring that up is because Prince was always purpose driven, right? Like he was a philanthropist, and a lot of people didn't know how much of humanity he helped. He helped the less fortunate. He helped donate money, which was more talked about after his passing. He died from a fentanyl overdose, and I do want to talk about that too a little bit more into this episode. But he would give to local black schools a lot of times, people that were probably more deprived from a good education, and Prince was looking out for his community, and he was definitely a person that loved he was outspoken. He definitely loved to help humanity as a whole, but also give back to where he came from, right? And so me and Prince, we good forever, right? Now, by the time I was 35 years old, by doing it my way, and when I say by doing it my way, by living a selfish and self-centered lifestyle and not really caring about what anybody thought about me, by being caught up in my own trauma bonded with myself, right? Like by being caught up in my own traumas and letting them consume me, I end up a homeless man living out of my car. And And I still kind of thought I had it going on. I didn't think I was as bad as the other homeless people. You know, we talk about being an egomaniac with an inferiority complex. Like, talk about being egocentric to the point where you're homeless, but you look down on other homeless people because you're not as bad as some of them. I did everything from couch surfing to sleeping in my car to sometimes sleeping outside. I would shower in community pools in certain communities. I would shower at the gym. I never actually was using my gym membership to go and work out, because who works out when they're on drugs? Well, I've known a few actually, but that's pretty much what happened to me. I was at the gates of hell, and there was a series of events that happened where I had some major, deep realizations that I need to do what I feared the most, and that was actually to ask for help. So I did, and once I did, everything just came together. I actually ended up at the front doorstep of a different house from the original man that I met when I was 30 years old, the Persian man. He had a recovery center, and that is where it all changed for me. That was the man that, he was an angel that was placed in my path, not once, but twice. And by going in and surrendering to whatever he had in store for me, my life changed immensely, dramatically. I mean, like, next level, right? This man was an inspiration to me. He was like a father figure, like a father I never had. On top of that, he was like a recovery coach that I really needed. And that man showed me a different way of living. And he encouraged me to go to school. And he encouraged me to go to the Human Services Department at Saddleback College, and then go and study drug and alcohol studies extensively, which I did, and finished top of my class. The same guy, me, that could never perform well in school, in high school, or in art school, because I went to the Art Institute when I was in active addiction and completely tanked that opportunity. But that same man encouraged me to go for drug and alcohol studies, and I was absolutely opposed at first. I told him I'm not good in school, and he said, try it sober, watch what happens. Be driven and watch what happens. And he was not kidding. I finished top of my class, 4.0 student, dean's list, and I went on to work in addiction treatment. And so first it started with adolescent treatment. Department of Justice took me out of there after a little while because they didn't think that a person that used to sell methamphetamines should be working with adolescents. I fought that case. I beat that case. They were going to put me on a probationary period to start working with adolescents again. By that time, I was already working in adult treatment. And so I got to work on the front lines. I was a case manager, a program director. I pretty much worked in every position in treatment except for being a therapist. I've never gone to school for therapy, although I am back in school right now, working towards a few different things. But by working in treatment, I got to see the ins and outs of treatment, and to see the importance of why somebody should go to treatment, why somebody needs to be detoxified under medical supervision and clinical supervision, and being helped to try to get their lives and transform and go back and reintegrate back into life as a person that's in recovery. So while I worked in treatment, I always had this idea that, I was in 12-step circles a lot, that I would like to share the joys of recovery that I have on a more vast level, right? I wanted to be able to be out there in the world and be able to have my voice heard, because I love recovery. I love being sober. I overcame my own addiction. I had a turning point experience when I was in treatment where we did a psychodrama, and I got to relive the day of my car accident. And it was one of the most powerful moments, because it was after that where I just decided different. Like, it's going to be different now. Like, I don't want to, I don't want to look back and regret the past, but I definitely never want to forget where I came from. And by doing so, I made a commitment to help every single addict and alcoholic of every age, race, creed, color, one day at a time for the rest of my life. So I don't say this to be pompous or arrogant. I don't want to relapse. I want permanent recovery, and that is what I work on a daily basis by staying on this path. Now, over the years, when I wanted my voice to be heard more, I started to work in centers where I remember the first time I ever got my feet wet when it came into the podcast world was at a place I worked at a beginnings treatment in Costa Mesa, California, and I was working alongside a young man that was in his early 20s named Austin Armstrong. I'm sure he won't mind me calling him out because that man was a person that was he showed me a deep admiration towards who I was in the recovery community, and I always like to work alongside young people that are driven and trying to make a difference in the world and that have a purpose. And he's gone on to do some great things too. But Austin and I started our first podcast that was called The Sober Grind. And so he was the normie and I was the addict. And sometimes he would interview me or ask me questions or pick topics. And based off of my knowledge base, both educationally and through self-disclosure, things that I'd seen, or even like people that I was trying to help, he and I would kind of just vibe together, and it was really good. And I didn't really know what I was doing. It was one camera, one microphone, but it was good. Like that's where we started. And then he later during the pandemic, when we were all confined to our homes, got me into the path of going and being on TikTok. So I asked him at first, why would I go on TikTok? And he said, well, Pej, at this point now I had become an interventionist. I was about 2 or 3 years in. I've done interventions pretty much my whole recovery, but not professionally. And I was trained under the direction of Earl Hightower, who is a world-renowned interventionist. And at this time, he said, you need to build your brand and you need to get your name out there and help people. And TikTok would be the best way to build your brand. And as opposed as I was to it at first, I started doing it. So I would start filming a lot of small shorts, in everything, talking about various substances like fentanyl, like heroin, like meth, like cocaine, like alcohol, like benzodiazepines. And as I would make these videos, at first I thought like I needed to be a teacher from a podium talking, but no. He told me to just be natural, like just be in my own element and allow myself to flow through freely. And that is the way that I believe a lot of people started to jump on board to become interested in what my message consisted of. And then obviously I also started a YouTube channel during that time called Pej Interventions. Now, we stopped doing the Sober Grind because both of us left that company and the Sober Grind belonged to them. But he pushed me in the direction of creating my own podcast named Pej's Recovery Corner, which is on this backdrop wall right here. Now, Pej's Recovery Corner was something that I manifested from a Facebook page that I started in 2015, where I took a stock photo of a modern chair and Big P that was graffiti. I'm a fan of street art. I myself used to be a street artist, a muralist, things like that. So I saw this graffiti P in a room with a modern chair, and I thought to myself, that is where I would like to be one day, so that I can interview guests sitting in that chair with a backdrop that is part of Pej's Recovery Corner. It's a corner where you can come to, and we can interview you and hear your stories. So we started that. And when we started it on YouTube, unfortunately, the podcast was embedded into my Pej Interventions. I guess I'm undiagnosed ADHD because I'm a little scattered when it comes to trying to organize certain things. And I never thought that Pej's Recovery Corner should be its own YouTube channel so people could find it more. But like the guests that we would have were out of this world. I mean, and this was the pandemic times. So it's like all of us were confined to our homes. So I would have a lot of people come over to my home so that we could record. And again, it was just one microphone, one camera. We didn't really know what we were doing, but we were doing it, right? I had a friend that lived with me that acted as the engineer. He would put together all the recordings, and I would get guests in, many different types of people from all walks of life. I mean, everything from people that had alcoholism to addiction. Some of them were former celebrities. Some of them were current celebrities, comedians, things like that. Friends of mine that I'd have come on and I would interview them. And I had this deep appreciation for people that were doing podcasts or people that had radio shows, such as Howard Stern. I really love his interviewing style. And so I would listen to them and I thought, okay, I got to develop my own style. And so Pej's Recovery Corner took off for quite some time. We had it up and running for at least 2-3 years. And And it did well. Like for a while it did well, but here's what happened. On YouTube, we started to get age restricted and we weren't consecutive in the way that our thumbnails appeared. And I learned later on that if I really want to make this go somewhere, I've got to have help from people that have the experience in doing so. Now, what happened because we got age restricted, we started having less viewership, and I brought on a producer who actually is part of a team. We've got a gentleman here right now that's actually doing the engineering today, and also an editor. And these guys had, I looked at their roster and they'd worked with some pretty big names. And so when I sat with my producer and talked to him, he said, Pej, unfortunately, due to the fact of some of the wording that you used in some of your videos on YouTube, you've been dinged and you're not going to be getting the viewership that you like. And I said, so what do you suggest? He said, I suggest you make a whole new show and enter Primary Purpose with Pej. Now, primary purpose, for those of us in the recovery world, know that it is a common term that we use. Our primary purpose is to help the struggling addict or alcoholic. And so I believe there's even a podcast called Just Primary Purpose that's part of Alcoholics Anonymous. But Primary Purpose with Pej, this podcast, I wanted to take it to a different level. I wanted to start interviewing people outside the box. I definitely always want to interview my recovery peeps. That's my tribe. Like, I love stories. I love transformations. I love interviewing people on here and hearing about their upbringing and then what ended up happening and where they took it and what direction they took it in. But I want to get people from all walks of life. I want to get authors. I want to get deep thinkers. I want to get innovators. I want to get visionaries. And so that's the direction that Primary Purpose is going in. This is not just a recovery podcast anymore. This is much more than that. I've got some guests that are lined up that I've admired for a long time, and I've had the honor and privilege of being able to talk to them and ask them to come on the show, and they will be soon. And I'm just in the world of manifestation. Whatever I envision, anything I dreamed of, has just multiplied and gone in directions that I never expected it to go. I absolutely love what I'm doing. I watch a lot of people start a lot of podcasts, and over a period of time, they stop. They might get too busy in their lives, or it doesn't go they don't become Joe Rogan overnight. And that's not even the direction I want to go in. I don't care about that. I want to be able to help people. I want to give more inspiration to people by powerful forces that have been placed in my life for me to observe, learn from, see, and become more inspired. And that is why I do what I do, right? When I say the ways of the world, the things that have just gone on, I'm not by any means a person that follows a certain type of politics. I observe. I sit on the sidelines and I watch and I listen and I look at people and I learn from people. We just lost Charlie Kirk a couple weeks ago, and it has been so interesting to watch people with different political beliefs and their opinions about him. And I knew who he was before he passed away. I had seen him on one of those debate, like 20 different students trying to debate him. And he was an interesting person. He was definitely well-read, well-versed, and had a certain delivery system and believed in his beliefs. He was a religious man, and I have to respect that he was a man of faith. Some people would not agree with how he displayed himself through his faith. I try to find things wrong with him because I see so many people say there are things wrong with him. And I'm not saying that I'm the biggest fan of him. Like, I wasn't an avid follower for a long time, but there was some things that he spoke on that a lot of people were afraid to speak about. And he did. And I guess in the end, he lost his life because of it. And I do believe in free speech. I think that what happened to him was definitely tragic. Is it surprising? I guess not. I work with non-binary people. I've had them on my show. I've seen a plethora of non-binary. I'm transgender. I've had them in my homes. I have some recovery homes, and I've seen some glorious outcomes in their recovery when they decide that they want to get sober. And so to see the way that it all went down is very interesting to me, and it'll be interesting to see how it all pans out too. Like what direction will it go into? But I felt compelled to speak about that because, for some reason, just because I went down a Charlie Kirk rabbit hole online, now there's a lot of stuff that keeps coming up, and I get to learn more and more about him. And some of his philosophies I understand and I agree with. He actually spoke about Iranian Persians that come to this country, and I agreed with some of the stuff that he said. But I will say this too: there is still racism in the United States. I grew up a target of racism. I experienced oppression in my own way. There was a lot of people that called me many derogatory names while growing up. And for a long time, I took it personal. But after a while, I realized that when people say things that are offensive to me or to anybody for that matter, it's a learned behavior. And due to the collective ego and certain type of circles that people hang out or learn from, or family systems that they grow up in, they develop a belief system to where they think that they're right about how they believe. And so they, in a sense, will view themselves as more supreme than others. And I think that sometimes people have very strong messages or very effective messages or very meaningful messages, but I believe that the delivery sometimes can be misconstrued or can be offensive to many different types of people. So I believe we have to watch our words, because words have power, most definitely. I also wanted to talk about, human suffering, what I see on the front lines. Being an interventionist, outside of being a podcaster and an influencer on social media, being an interventionist, I get called on to go all around our country and sometimes globally to try to help people. And so when I have people that are in front of me because a family found me and wants me to try to coach them, help them, motivate them, invites me in, sometimes as a professional, sometimes just as, let's say, a spiritual practitioner, to try to get that person on the right path. What I realized is that when I say human suffering, it's not just the individual that God places in my path that I'm asked to come and learn about and try to help listen to, and hopefully eventually get them to get into a better style of living spiritually, mentally, emotionally. But it's also the people that surround them, like the families. There's a lot of families that are struggling with their loved ones, but they also have their own internal battles and they're struggling with themselves. I deal with many different families that think that they're not the problem, that their loved ones that are suffering from addiction, from mental health, from alcoholism, from manic depression, from anxiety. I think that a lot of family members think that they're not part of the problem, and truly they are. We can call it a family disease. We can call it family dysfunction. I often find myself telling a lot of Persian families, because a lot of Persians turn to me now to try to help their loved ones, because the man that helped me, that was helping the Persian community, died 2 years ago, and I watched him on his deathbed. But now when the Persians turn to me, often they will say, I'm not the one with the problem. She's got the problem, or he's got the problem. And I think, no. Like in your family, what did you think? It just came out of the air? In your family system, there was something going on there that they have taken on over the years, and it can create all different types of things: rebelliousness, defiance, being combative, trying to show you how they're going to be, making them feel like they don't amount to anything. They'll never amount to anything if they don't conform to the way that you'd like for them to grow up. And so, again, when it comes to a collective ego, there are certain family systems where there's high expectations. And when people will not conform to that, then they are looked down upon. And sometimes words can definitely affect that individual, sometimes violence too. So that happens a lot of times. There's a lot of people that suffer from abuse, verbal, mental, physical abuse in various systems, family systems. And so I find myself being called upon to go to many different areas in our country. Sometimes it's in people's family homes to try to help somebody with substance abuse and mental health. Sometimes it's going to tents in large encampments or small encampments even to try. It's like looking for a needle in a haystack to find somebody with an addiction problem that comes from a good family, right? But they've gone in a different direction in their life. Some are in psychosis, meth-induced psychosis, THC-induced psychosis, sometimes alcohol-induced psychosis. There's many different substances that can put a person in a state of psychosis. And one of the hardest jobs for me as an interventionist is to try to help someone in psychosis differentiate the true from the false and be able to come into a better path, right? And that's always a work in progress. It sometimes takes a long time. Sometimes they get better and sometimes they just don't. Some people have resorted to the streets. They've acclimated to the streets and that's just the way they want to live and they don't want anyone to help them. And sad as it may seem, that's the reality of what we live in. And another thing is to see, like, for myself, a man that was once homeless to go across our nation. And it's not just in metropolitan cities, although it is worse there than ever, but to go and see the amount of homelessness and how did that happen? Is it an economical problem? Is it a political problem? Is it because there's mental health in the mix? Obviously, a lot of times there's mental health in the mix. A lot of schizoaffective schizophrenia coupled with addiction. And why have these people, why are they walking the streets screaming at the sky? Why are they talking to themselves? Sometimes I listen to the conversations that they're having with themselves and it seems like they came from perhaps at some point some kind of education because they're using very complicated words in their conversations, and as nonsensical as it may seem, it seems like it makes sense to them, even though they're not really living their lives. And so for me, like just the other day, I was in Chicago and I was working on a case and somebody had told me to go down to Hubbard Street where there was a lot of street art. So I was taking pictures of the street art and I saw a homeless man laying out there and it reminded me of myself when I was homeless. And he saw me taking pictures of the wall. Like he got up, he wanted to get out. I wasn't about to take a picture of the guy, right? But he got up out of the way of the camera. And I just looked at him and I asked him, how's your day going? How's it going out here, right? Because I feel for them. Like I'm still an empath by nature, so I feel for them because I know it can't be easy. I'd love to be able to get those types of people food as opposed to giving them money because I know if I give them money, I'm basically just putting fuel in their fire of potential addiction. So there's that too that I deal with. And then there's, something that I brought up earlier as far as Prince and his addiction to fentanyl. And so, I don't believe that Prince was addicted to fentanyl in the sense that he had psychological issues and was turning to pain meds because he was trying to numb out something psychologically. I do believe that. And I know that a lot of the Prince community thinks that they killed him. And really, if anybody killed him, it would be the people that distribute the fentanyl. But I do believe that it was legitimate pain that came from a lot of, dancing in heels, jumping off rafters, doing the splits quite often. He was one of the best dancers that I ever encountered. But I think that really became the death of him because he developed a lot of pain throughout his life and his body couldn't handle that pain for a long time. I do believe that he was on pain medication throughout his life many times. And later on, the dark web was a thing already. And I believe that there's something happened there to where whatever he was doing outside of that Walgreens wasn't going to be enough for him. And so he ended up getting something that he thought was something online that was cut with fentanyl. And we see this a lot. Like in this day and age, and I want to kind of just talk about that. Like we are in a day and age where fentanyl has run rampant. It is not, what's out there right now is not the traditional medical grade fentanyl that's been used since the 60s. It is now being distributed if you want to read a good book, Fentanyl Incorporated, I think it's by Ben Westholm. He wrote this book that is so descriptive and so detailed and breaks down how fentanyl, where it originates from, where it's being made by the chemists that make them in China, as well as how it's distributed and how it's getting into the hands of people. I mean, I've got people that find me through my social media outlets such as TikTok, Facebook. All of these different people are telling me that there's counterfeit pills, that their cocaine is cut with fentanyl, that their meth is cut with fentanyl, that they're using blues, which is the counterfeit pills that look like M30s, which would be oxycodone, and they know at a certain point this is actually fentanyl, and because of the power of the drug that's so captivating, they now just become stuck on that, and either it's going to be the death of them, or they're going to do something and they're going to get out of that and go get the help and treat their fentanyl addiction. But it is bad. It is really bad. And I'm talking from every single state. There's people from Maine, from Delaware, states where you don't really expect there to be a large drug problem, but you would be surprised. It's those states that have like a very large drug problem, and then there's obviously many other states. Every single state, I think I've heard of a person from every state in our United States that has been addicted to fentanyl, at least one person that I've met that has gone to treatment with a fentanyl addiction. And then there's people that go to treatment thinking they have a stimulant addiction, let's say, for example, meth, and then when they do a urinalysis, they find fentanyl in their system, and they tell them, hey, you have fentanyl in your system. I don't use fentanyl. Actually, your stuff was probably cut with it. And they say things like, no wonder the come down was so much different than when I used to come down from meth before. So that's like where we are with all this. Like, this is crazy. It's not going away. There's Trank. Trank is xylazine, which is a tranquilizer, right? An animal tranquilizer that is cut with fentanyl. And so a lot of times I go into parks like MacArthur Park in LA and see just encampments of people that are in a towel rack position. They call it towel racking because their bodies are positioned in a way where they're falling asleep, sometimes standing up, or they're just sitting on the ground, falling asleep, like dazed off because they've got the utensils that they use to use the fentanyl, and it's right there out in the open. I mean, I'm talking like there's people, I see a man, a woman, and his wife, and like kids walking into the park while there's a bunch of people slouched over that are doing drugs right out in the open. And I think they're trying to clean that up. But what's going to happen to those people? I always say, if I just had a lot of money, I would like to open a huge compound like that could house 200 people and bring people in and show them a recipe for recovery, as was done for me and as I try to do for the people that I try to help. Sky's the limit, right? No, it's not. We can do a lot in the world. But again, so back to the topic of what is your purpose? What is my purpose? A couple of years ago, I had a friend named Essie Bagari that wrote his own book, which was just a beautiful book. But then he wrote another book more recently called Resiliency Talks and Recovery. And he asked me to be in that book, to have my own chapter, which is chapter 7. And Essie's out of Canada. He is up in British Columbia. I went up and visited him, but he asked me to contribute a chapter to that book. And now I'm actually in the process of writing my own book. I found my purpose. I truly found my purpose. I'm not saying it in a way to where I know what my purpose completely consists of. I believe my purpose is constantly evolving. But at this point, I want to continue to keep helping every single addict, alcoholic, and person with mental health try to find themselves and become the best versions of themselves. I've had so many guests on the show that you can just tell when they're talking, they're purpose driven. And so I myself, I just love, what I love to be able to help. When I was deep in my addiction, I would often ponder and have these fleeting thoughts that would be like, it wasn't supposed to be like this. Like, I'm supposed to help humans. Why would that that was my consciousness. But I think that's when intuition was most definitely kind of just breaking through the numbness of the addiction to let me know you've got to change your life, so that if you want to help people, you got to get out of the grips of addiction and go do something about it. And that's what I did. When I raised my hands and did what I feared the most, which was my ego, my disease of addiction, whatever you want to call it, didn't want me to do. Once I raised my hands, God placed the angels in my path. People like Siamak Afshar, people like Amir, people like all the people that were placed in my path that showed me the ropes of recovery. And that's why it's been my ultimate duty to try to help others in the same sense. And that's what I'll do to the day I drop. I remember the day that Siamak was on his deathbed, gasping his last breaths of air. I was nervous. I asked the nurse, like, can I hold his hand? And she said, yeah, go over and touch his hand. And I held his hand, and he was already out. Like he was basically on a breathing machine. He looked like a shell of a human being. He was unrecognizable. But I remember holding his hand and hearing his voice in my head and saying, Pejman, when we die sober. We die sober. And I knew right in that moment that my greatest mentor and teacher was dying a sober man. And he had, like 40 some odd years. He was a former heroin addict that was mainlining heroin, former bank robber. I mean, it's such a beautiful human being that God placed into my life. I often, when I'm telling my story, say that he was my recovery Yoda. And he kind of even looked like Yoda at times and sounded like Yoda too. But that man, he showed me the ropes of recovery. And I've had spiritual giants that have been placed in my path, like the Earl Hightowers, like the Uncle Teds, like Farhad, like just people that truly demonstrated altruism through their actions and showed me that I have a purpose, and that they believed in me, and they would empower me, and they encouraged me to go to school, and manifestations just constantly kept happening. I remember being in my first recovery home when I wanted to be sober and thinking, like, how does this all work? And eventually opening my own homes in Westwood, LA, and up in all over LA and in Orange County, having these recovery homes and doing exactly in those homes that was done for me, because it's a formula that works and helps save lives. And I see people, they come and they submit to recovery, and they don't just be sober, because there's a difference between sobriety and recovery. They get into the path of recovery and they move mountains. Siamak used to tell me, you stick on this path and you're going to move mountains. I told him, Siamak, I'm going to chisel every single way of the way just to be able to get these mountains moved, right? And that's exactly what I did, and that's what I get to see. I see people come, and once they get on the path, they go back and get educated. They become therapists. They become just beautiful human beings that do great things. They become fathers and mothers, and they have kids, and they hold jobs, and most importantly, they're in active service of other people. So they find their purpose in their respective lifestyles or whatever field they're working in. And it's, for me, like, I have a very, very good life. Today's a very heavy day because I spoke with the love of my life this morning, who lost her father, and he was also in recovery, and I looked up to that man. He's my hero. He'll be my hero forever. He was my buddy. We would pal around. We'd go fishing together, and we even had the honor and privilege of having him speak in one of our meetings about a month and a half ago. And it was hard for him to even stand because he was pretty much on his way out. But he passed away at 4 a.m. this morning today. And I realized just, in that happening within itself, how precious life is. Like, my mom and dad are still alive, and I'm very, very blessed to still have them. Whenever I go to my parents, for everything I put them through, I hug them extra tight, and I kiss their faces. And I think to myself in that moment that when I'm doing that, like, I won't have their physical body here forever. So I need to cherish that moment and build that memory and know how important they are to me, because my parents always believed in me. And now I get to be this person that does have a purpose, and they're proud of me. I'll talk just about a couple more things. So, because we lost Siamak Afshar and we lost Dr. Shamsian, which were the people that were helping the Iranian Persian community for a long time, I'm now called by a lot of different Iranians to try to help their loved ones. Addiction runs rampant in our community. So I created this thing called an Iranian Family Support Group, which is on Zoom. on Wednesday nights, and I invite many different Iranians from around the world that are family members that have struggling loved ones. The first hour is now the family members, and the second hour is actually many of the Iranian men and women that have gotten sober, and we come and all interact together. I also joined forces with Sam Davis, who created an organization called Intervention on Call. Now, Intervention on Call is a group of providers. We are interventionists and family recovery coaches, and even individual recovery coaches for those that want to be in recovery. And I joined up with them last year. We only had one night a week, and we had families from across the United States and actually in other parts of the world, like the UK and Canada. It's grown. So now it went from one night a week to 5 nights a week, and we do these free family support groups. We're educating people and trying to teach them intervention techniques and how to deal with their loved ones. We get so many different stories and so many different scenarios and so many different people that come on. A lot of them find us through our social media presence, me definitely, Sam definitely, but we invite them in, and our group grew so much that one night wasn't going to be enough. If you would like to come and be a part of that because you have a struggling loved one, doesn't matter if it's your boyfriend, girlfriend, son, daughter, friend. If you have a person in your life that is struggling from addiction, I'd love to have you come on. You know, I invite everyone that I invite from my social media to come there. It helps them immensely. They tell me, wow, this is everything I needed. And it's free. I mean, you can book private sessions. That's going to cost you. But as far as the free family support groups, 5 nights a week, you just go to www.interventiononcall.com and you sign up, you register, and then you can pick whichever night of the week you want. The West Coast one is 8 p.m. Pacific Standard Time on Sunday nights, and then Monday through Thursday is 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We always bring special speakers on, but we have certain particular nights where we are working directly with families and we take questions and we're trying to help people. This builds more towards the purpose that I have. The people that are providers in there, I believe it's 7 of us that are all in the recovery process from past drug addiction and alcoholism. We're very like-minded. We see things the same, and we try to educate and help family members. And then there's one gentleman, Daryl Rogers, who lost his son a few years back, and he's also a provider. We're interventionists by nature. A lot of times if people, what we're teaching them isn't working, then they'll hire us to do interventions. Hence the reason I'm always traveling around the country and going to try to help people. And so, you know, I just have this big, beautiful, glorious life. If you haven't seen my content, and this is the first time that you see me, here I am on Primary Purpose with Pej, which is on YouTube and all other podcast platforms, but also on TikTok, Pej Interventions. On Facebook, look for Pej's Recovery Corner. That's a page that I have where I display a lot of different stuff. I do a lot of lives on there and things like that. And then my Instagram, which we just can't seem to get growing, is Pej Interventions too. Yeah. And also Pej Media, P-E-J Media. So, you know, I wanted to come on and talk to y'all. Like, I bring on so many guests, but I had a lot to say, and I think I said it all today. I hope that you like this channel so far. We could use your support. If you are on YouTube, please subscribe. Please share with others. Please comment in the comment section. And until we meet again, I will be bringing on a guest again next week. Thanks.